I, 24 female, lost my mother when I was 13. She was a loving, hard-working woman, and one of the things she was most proud of was the college fund she had set aside for me. Even though we weren't rich, she was determined to make sure I could get a good education without being buried in student loans. She always told me how important education was, and she did everything in her power to save up for me. I was her only child, and she made sure I knew that this college fund was her legacy for me. After my mother passed, my father remarried within a year to Susan, 52 female, my stepmother. Susan brought along her daughter, Jessica, 29 female, my stepsister, who was 19 at the time and already a single mother of 2 kids. Jessica's baby daddy was completely out of the picture, and she had no stable income or education to support herself and her kids. Despite my reservations, I tried to be accepting of my new family, but things quickly went downhill. When I turned 17, it was time for me to start applying to colleges. I had worked hard in high school, got decent grades, and was excited about the prospect of attending university. But when I brought up the topic of my college fund with my dad, I noticed he and Susan were both acting strangely. They kept putting off the conversation, saying we'd talk about it later. Eventually, I sat them down and insisted on discussing it. That's when they dropped the bombshell. My college fund was gone. It turns out, my father and Susan had decided that Jessica needed the money more than I did because she was struggling as a single mom and wanted to go back to school herself. They didn't tell me. They didn't ask me. They just took the money my mother had saved for me and used it to pay for Jessica's education, as well as some of her living expenses and childcare. I was in absolute shock. I couldn't believe that not only had they stolen from me, but they had done so without even considering how it would affect my future. When I confronted them, they gave me a bunch of excuses, saying that family takes care of each other and that Jessica had more urgent needs than I did at the time. Jessica's education didn't even last long. She dropped out after less than a year and went back to doing nothing productive with her life. The money my mother worked so hard to save for me was completely wasted. But by that point, the damage had already been done. I was devastated, and our relationship was never the same after that. I still finished high school with good grades, but without the college fund, my plans had to change. I ended up going to a community college while working part-time jobs to support myself. I made it through, but I'll be honest, it was tough. I struggled financially, and I often thought about how much easier things would have been if my father and Susan hadn't stolen my future from me. Despite all of this, I tried to maintain some form of a relationship with my father, but I kept my distance from Susan and Jessica. Every interaction with them felt like a reminder of how I had been robbed of opportunities for their benefit. Jessica continued to live her chaotic lifestyle, going from one bad relationship to another, never holding down a job for long, and generally relying on Susan and my father to support her and her kids. Fast forward a few years. I'm now 24. I've managed to get my degree in accounting, thankfully without drowning in student debt, and I've started building a life for myself. I'm doing okay financially. I have a good job, and I've worked hard to become independent. Here's where the current drama begins. About a year ago, Jessica's life took a serious downward turn. She got involved with D, and things spiraled out of control fast. Her kids, now 10 and 8, were being neglected, and social services eventually stepped in. Jessica ended up going to rehab after she was arrested for possession. For the past year, my father and Susan have been looking after Jessica's kids. I felt bad for the kids, but I've kept my distance because, frankly, I've had enough of the drama. I wasn't going to let myself get sucked back into the mess they've created. However, last week, my father and Susan called me, saying they needed to talk urgently. I agreed to meet them, thinking they wanted to discuss Jessica's situation or maybe ask for financial help, which, frankly, I wasn't eager to give. But when I sat down with them, I was completely blindsided by their request. They told me that now that Jessica was in rehab, they couldn't handle taking care of her kids anymore. They're both in their 50s, and apparently, it's too much for them to manage 2 young children full-time. They said it was time for me to step up as part of the family and take responsibility for the kids. I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they had done to me, stealing my college fund, prioritizing Jessica's needs over mine for years, they were now asking me to raise her kids? Kids I barely had any relationship with, and whose mother had been the cause of so much pain in my life. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process the sheer audacity of their request. Then, my father dropped the final bombshell. They wanted me to use whatever financial resources I had to help raise the kids, because, as they put it, family takes care of each other. He even had the nerve to suggest that the money I had been saving from my job could be used to support the kids, just as they had helped Jessica when she needed it most. That was when I couldn't hold it in any longer. I laughed. I really laughed. It wasn't just a chuckle or a snicker. It was one of those deep, uncontrollable laughs that comes from a place of disbelief and pure frustration. I laughed so hard that my father and Susan just stared at me, dumbfounded. After my laughter subsided, I finally spoke. I told them that the idea of me stepping in to raise Jessica's kids was absurd, especially considering how they had treated me over the years. I reminded them of how they had stolen my college fund and given it to Jessica without my knowledge or consent. I told them how I had to struggle to make ends meet and work my way through college while Jessica dropped out and did nothing with the money they gave her. And now, I said, you want me to sacrifice my life for Jessica's kids? After everything you put me through, do you honestly believe I owe you or Jessica anything? My father started to sputter, saying that this was different and that the kids were innocent in all of this. Susan chimed in, trying to guilt-trip me by saying I was abandoning my family in their time of need, and that the children would suffer if I didn't help. I cut them both off and told them that they had to make their choices. They chose to prioritize Jessica over me for years, and now they were dealing with the consequences of those choices. I made it clear that I wasn't going to take on the responsibility of raising Jessica's children. They were her responsibility, not mine, and if they couldn't handle it, they should look into finding other family members or social services who could step in. As I got up to leave, my father grabbed my arm and said something that still makes my blood boil. He said, "Your mother would be ashamed of you." That was the last straw. I yanked my arm away from him and told him that the only person my mother would be ashamed of is him. He betrayed her memory by stealing the college fund she worked so hard to build for me and giving it to someone who never appreciated it. I told him that if my mother were still alive, none of this would have happened, and I wouldn't have had to fight for the life I now have. Then, without another word, I walked out. That confrontation happened about a week ago, and I haven't spoken to my father or Susan since. They've tried calling and texting me multiple times, accusing me of being heartless and selfish. They've even gone so far as to involve other family members, telling them that I refuse to help and that I'm letting the children suffer. Of course, they've conveniently left out the part where they stole my college fund and tried to guilt me into taking on the responsibility that they should be handling. Some family members have reached out to express their disappointment in me, saying that I should have helped for the sake of the kids, while others have been more understanding, knowing the full story. I feel torn between guilt over the kids, who didn't ask to be in this situation, and the anger I still harbor toward my father and Susan for how they treated me. I want to be clear. I have nothing against the children themselves. I feel bad for them. I do wish they had a more stable life. But I also know that I can't sacrifice my own future, my own well-being, to clean up the mess that Jessica, my father, and Susan have created. I worked too hard to pull myself out of the financial hole they put me in, and I'm finally in a place where I can start planning for my own future. Part of me wonders if I was too harsh. Maybe I should have at least offered to help in some small way. Maybe financially, or by watching the kids occasionally. But I also feel like my father and Susan don't deserve that kind of help from me. They betrayed my trust in the worst way possible, and now they're trying to manipulate me into fixing a situation they had a hand in creating. At the same time, I feel a sense of vindication. For years, I was made to feel like I was the selfish one for wanting what was rightfully mine, for expecting my father to honor my mother's wishes. But now, seeing them scramble to clean up Jessica's mess, I can't help but feel like this is the inevitable result of their choices. They enabled Jessica for years, constantly bailing her out and excusing her poor decisions. Now, they're facing the consequences, and they don't know how to handle it. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole for laughing in their faces and refusing to raise Jessica's kids? OP's father and stepmother have some serious nerve. First, they steal OP's college fund, and now they have the audacity to expect OP to clean up their mess and take on Jessica's responsibilities? That's absolutely ridiculous. OP worked hard to build a life for herself, despite what they did to her, and OP is under no obligation to sacrifice that for the people who treated her so poorly. They clearly haven't learned anything from enabling Jessica all these years, and now they're paying the price. And now let's hear the community's opinion. Absolutely not the a-hole. Raising children is a massive responsibility that you didn't sign up for, especially when it's the kids of someone who benefited from what was supposed to be your future. Your father and stepmother have proven time and again that they'll prioritize Jessica over you, and it's beyond manipulation to try to guilt you into taking on this burden. Laughing in their faces might have been a bit dramatic, but I get it. After everything they've done, they needed to hear that you aren't their fallback plan. You have every right to prioritize your own life. Not the a-hole. I think it's important to recognize that while the kids are innocent, you've already been through so much at the hands of your father and stepmother. It's not just about the stolen college fund. It's about the complete disregard for your future and well-being. You're not obligated to step in just because they're finally feeling the consequences of their actions. They enabled Jessica's bad decisions for years, and it's clear that they're still looking for someone else to fix things. You have every right to protect yourself and the life you've built. Not the a-hole, not even close. It's wild that they think after taking away your college fund, your future, you'd still be willing to step in and raise your stepsister's kids. That kind of betrayal doesn't just go away. The fact that Jessica's life has spiraled is unfortunate, but it's not your responsibility to clean up her mess. Your father and stepmother have a history of bad choices, and it's unfair for them to expect you to pay the price yet again. You did what you had to do, and laughing in their faces was probably the only sane reaction to such a ridiculous demand. My 26 female, sister, 35 female, lost her home due to her husband gambling. They practically lost everything and were forced to eviction. Our parents had always preferred my sister way more. She's the perfect child, perfect husband, perfect house, perfect career. She's a doctor, and thus she came to me for help. She cried and begged to please let her stay here with me and to not tell anything to our parents until she was divorced. I did, because I know how mean they can be. My boyfriend and I own a 2-bedroom apartment, the guest room that's rather small, and our room that's a lot bigger and has an ensuite bathroom with a bathtub. This is important. My boyfriend is currently staying with his parents in Texas, so I have the whole house to myself. We talked about it and agreed to let my sister use the guest room and pay minimum rent for a few months. Everything was fine at first, until a few weeks ago when we had some problems with the bathroom my sister uses, and she had to use mine. When she found out I had a bathtub, she was thrilled. She said, "Why didn't I say anything before?" And I told her because it was my personal bathroom and I didn't have to. The problem got fixed in 2 days, but every once in a while she asked me to use my bathtub. I said yes a few times until she just stopped asking and began to go into my bath every time she wanted. She then tried to leave products there until one day I found her sleeping in my bed. I woke her up and told her to get out, but she said that it wasn't fair that I had the better room with the better bath and everything, that she was a doctor and deserved the room way more, and the best thing was to move to the small room and let her have it. I was mad. I couldn't believe that she was in my house trying to rule me. I told her that this wasn't just my house, but my boyfriend's too, and that she had to get her things and leave. She said that I was overreacting, and I told her that yes, sure, but I know how these things usually are, and I don't plan to have it her way. She said that she didn't have anywhere else to go, and I told her too bad. She had to come clean to my parents and is currently staying there. They are mad at me for kicking her out and forcing her to embarrass herself in front of them, and that I owe her my house for free as long as she wants. Not the a-hole. You welcomed your sibling into your home and just wanted basic decency, and she trampled all over your boundaries. She deserves what she gets, to be honest. Not the a-hole. You were doing her a favor and she overstepped. I probably would have given her a few days' notice, but she seems incredibly entitled. As a doctor, unless they're garnishing her check for her hubby's debts, she should be able to afford at least something small for herself. Oh wow, your parents are so blinded by their golden child rhetoric, they can't even see how ludicrous they're being. Good on you, and my sincere applause for surviving black sheep syndrome. That's not easy. Not the a-hole, obviously. Your sister might be a doctor, but unfortunately, she still has a lot of growing up to do. For a little context, my husband, 30 male, and I, 30 female, have a baby boy, 1 male. My husband has a sister and a nephew, 5 male. Our nephew was the favorite, and everything always had to be done around his desires and my sister-in-law's desires. Nephew is really jealous of our son, and my sister-in-law cannot play with him or look at him without a tantrum. The story. 2 months ago, we invited mother-in-law, father-in-law, sister-in-law, and nephew, and my parents to our son's first birthday in our home. We took care of the decorations, sleeping accommodations, cooking. The party was supposed to happen on Sunday around 1 p.m. On Saturday at 6 p.m., they said we should do it now because sister-in-law and nephew had to go early in the next morning. We later learned she finally had to go on the Sunday afternoon. So we prepared everything, but it was getting late, and my son was falling asleep. Sleep at 7 p.m. usually. We put the decorations and everything outside. When everyone was ready, my mother-in-law and father-in-law put presents on the table in front of my nephew and said happy birthday. His birthday was 5 months ago, but they hadn't seen him during that time. They gave other presents to my son. I was livid. My nephew was opening the presents, everyone was looking at him, and my son was sleepy and nobody looked at him, except husband and my family. As he was tired too, I said I was putting son to sleep and went inside without finishing to open the presents. When I came back, nephew was always asking to open my son's presents and said he didn't have enough. I roll. He is spoiled. Prior to this, he had spent the day saying it was his birthday, not my son, and we explained it was not, but looks like he was right. I said thank you for everything, but we should open the presents when my son was awake in the next morning. The day after, we opened the presents, but my sister-in-law and nephew went outside in the middle of it because my husband said nephew shouldn't take the toys from our son by force. It displeased sister-in-law, who went outside. My father-in-law and mother-in-law were tidying my nephew's toys by then. We did not finish to open the presents, but said between my husband and parents that we would do it later between us. When I talked to sister-in-law, she said it was a nice birthday and I was too sensitive. She said I should have done something if I was so displeased. I said, maybe I should have taken your son's presents from him and be a monster. If not, when could I have done something? Am I too sensitive? Is it normal to do this? I said to husband I didn't want to see them for some time, and he totally agreed, but I am second-guessing myself. Am I the a-hole for cutting the family for this? Not the a-hole, but take a breath and let it go. Don't let yourself get talked into their drama. Be straightforward and do your thing next time. Party is on Sunday. You can't come? Too bad. Come for a visit another day. Try not to get bitter about it or get angry. It won't help anything. Not the a-hole. It sounds like they hijacked your baby's birthday and they had planned it without telling you. Sister-in-law forced you to have the party a day early when she knew before she got there that they had to leave early on Sunday. She could have stayed home or asked you in advance to do it on Saturday. Why would anyone show up to a kid's birthday with gifts for a different kid? If anything, mother-in-law and father-in-law could have put nephew's gifts in the car with him when he left, since they hadn't seen him in so long. Your in-laws suck. You should have stood your ground and stuck to having the party on Sunday. Don't go out of your way to accommodate people that wouldn't do the same for you.